Students, thanks for watching Part A, the first 30 minutes of the classic Western Stagecoach. So why are we watching this movie? I want to give you a few good reasons. First of all, our focus is on the movies of the 1930s, and Stagecoach is, I think, the best Western movie of that time period. Number two, the copy of the movie that you're watching comes from the Criterion Collection, which gathers some of the greatest films ever made and then remasters them and then adds extra stuff onto a 2-disc set that includes cool bonus features and a really wonderful essay. So if you're a fan of the movie, you've got a really great package. It is possible to get cheaper copies of Stagecoach. Just get one of those 500 yen DVDs from Amazon or Rakuten. But they never look as good as the one that comes from Criterion. Criterion also remastered City Lights and Modern Times, and those Criterion versions are the ones that you saw before. 3. Stagecoach was a very successful film. It got several nominations from the Academy and won 2 Oscars. It's on the AFI list of the top 100 movies in film history, and it was inducted in 1995 to the National Film Registry. Number 4, it was directed by John Ford, one of the most famous directors in Hollywood history, especially known for his westerns. Number 5, like Chaplin films, Stagecoach has been widely written about. BFI Film Classics and Cambridge University Press are but 2 of the biggest names that have published essays on this film. So, there are some reasons for you why Stagecoach is an important enough movie for us to study. Okay, let's get into the movie. The year is sometime around 1880 to 1885, and the place is the American Southwest, specifically the Arizona Territory, a frontier region for white settlers. Indians, specifically the Apaches, are the enemy. This guy is an Apache, though. He's a Cheyenne. Here at the beginning, they've reported an Apache attack against white frontier settlers, and this sets up the very first plot for the movie. Indians are savage. They are uncivilized. They're dangerous to white people, and Geronimo is their leader. Next, we're in the town of Tonto, Arizona. It's a small town. No railroad comes through, so people have to come in and out by stagecoach. And here comes the stagecoach now. This coach is pulled by 6 horses. The stagecoach is really important. It brings people and mail and money for the bank. If you take a look here, the guy jumps off, and you can see they pull out this big money box, locked, and it's from Wells Fargo. Do you notice that? Wells Fargo, even today, is one of the top 5 banks in the USA. Notice the men next take away the stagecoach's horses because you've got to give them water and you got to let them rest. See, right over here. All right, so the driver opens up.
You better get out and stretch your your limbs, ma'am. We're going to...
You better get out and stretch your limbs, ma'am. Apparently, the driver catches himself saying legs and then quickly uses a more polite word, limbs. The point here is that back in 1880, around that time, talking to a woman about her legs was improper. Get a look at our first stagecoach passenger, Lucy Mallory. She is a polite, well-dressed woman, high-class manner of speaking. We find soon that she's an officer's wife, and she's traveling to see her husband. And over here, a gambler is looking at her, because she's very beautiful. She's a real lady. After she walks past the gambler, she asks about the gambler, and we're told that he's not a gentleman. He's a notorious gambler. Notorious means bad reputation. In just 40 seconds of screen time, the movie introduces a subplot of two characters who have some kind of connection somehow. In a very short period of screen time, the director plants this relationship in the audience's mind. Next, back to the Stagecoach story. The Stagecoach driver is a guy named Buck, and he's a local guy who knows everybody in town. He goes in and he talks to the marshal. The marshal is like a sheriff or the police chief. The driver says he needs his shotgun guard. Every stagecoach needs a driver to run the horses and a man to ride shotgun or to protect the stagecoach from robbers. You know, the stagecoach often carries money. But the marshal says, no, sorry, the shotgun guard isn't there. He's been sent out to capture the Ringo Kid, who escaped from jail. Ringo, I love this.
Who was in the pen?
He was.
Busted out? Well, good for him.
Mike.
He escaped from jail. Well, good for him. So this is kind of a funny point. Buck knows Ringo, and he's happy that he escaped. We learn that Ringo Kid was put in jail because of the Plummer brothers' testimony in court. And we learn that the Ringo Kid is probably planning to find the Plummer boys and kill them. So, Ringo has escaped jail to get revenge with the Plummer boys. Luke Plummer was seen in Lordsburg, and that's where the stagecoach is going. So the marshal decides he'll have to help search for Ringo. He's going to have to be the shotgun guard for the stagecoach. Now, that is a lot of important information in a very brief scene. It only goes on for about 45 seconds, almost exactly as long as the scene where we learn about Mrs. Mallory. This information is not central to the plot of the movie, but this part is very central to the plot of the movie. It sets up the revenge saga. The revenge saga is often the central story in a Western movie. The bad guys did something wrong, and the good guy has to go out and get revenge against the bad guys. Okay, next character that we see is the banker. The Wells Fargo box gets to the bank owner, and then the camera stays on him in this strange mid-range shot. You know, like, ooh, maybe he's evil. What's he up to? Is he a good guy or is he a bad guy? But he must be important in this movie because the camera stays on him. At this point, we're only less than 6 minutes into the movie, and already two major stories have revealed themselves. First, the Indians who are coming, and they're dangerous. And second, there's someone who wants revenge. So, Indian threat and revenge story. And we've got two minor stories that kind of tease us a little bit. The banker, what is he up to? And what's going on with Mrs. Mallory and the bad gambler? Next, we see a little bit more of the town of Tonto, Arizona. We already know that it's got expected institutions like a hotel, a cafe, a marshal's office, and a bank. Now, we see a moral institution, the ladies' group. We see them at work here. They're walking behind a young blonde woman, and the woman's face has shame all over it. We can only guess that she's done something bad. But before we find out more, we see a man getting thrown out of his room because he hasn't paid the rent. When he starts talking, we know that he's drunk. So this is really the very first bit of comedy in the film. Of course, part of the comedy comes from the fact that he's a doctor, And a doctor is supposed to be a high-class character.
Is this the face that wrecked 1,000 ships and burned the towerless tops of Ilium?
What a face she's got on there. He's quoting some old poem about Greek history, Helen of Troy. And so the woman who's being thrown out of town by the Ladies' Law and Order League runs to Doc for help. These old women are just so judgmental, so superior. They are literally looking down their noses. You see how arrogant and haughty these women are? They've got their chins up, and so they're looking down their noses literally at the blonde woman. Now Doc, he's an older, experienced man. He's wise, and he offers the young woman a little bit of dignity to get out of town. And the music that's playing here is really quite interesting and fun.
Girls, I'll join you.
Dun, 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 dun. The name of the song is Shall We Gather at the River, and it's an old church song that audiences of 1939 would know pretty well. Okay, a note about these women here in the background. These women, they are probably the wives of the banker, the hotel owner, the stagecoach owner. They're the wives of the richest people in the community, and they're church ladies. Frontier towns like these often had a ladies' group in movies who were fighting against alcohol or gambling or prostitution, anything that they thought was immoral. So the pretty blonde woman and Doc stop at the bar for Doc to get a drink before he's completely run out of town. And he talks to the bartender, the saloon keeper. He says, we'll give you just one drink, okay, Doc? And this is where we see this small, quiet man, and we find out that he's a whiskey drummer, which means that he's a whiskey salesman. And of course, Doc is very excited about this. He's found a new best friend, someone who has whiskey with him all the time. And he walks over and he says, "How are you, Mr. Haycock?" And his name is Peacock. And this is a running joke that goes throughout the movie. Everyone gets this guy's name wrong. Why? Because he's not really a memorable kind of guy. All right, next. The stagecoach is getting ready. Notice that the driver knows the name of each horse. The driver says, "Hey, this is my favorite team here." Yeah, back it up. Got my favorite team there. The guy who drives the stage, Buck, might be a little bit loud and goofy, but he's very knowledgeable about horses, and he knows how to drive a team. And that's a nice example of how this director lets a character's character unfold slowly throughout the story. Little by little, we get more information about each character on the stagecoach. We find out that the banker's wife is not a very nice, warm lady. The banker doesn't look very happy about having to give her money, and certainly doesn't seem happy about having the ladies of the Law and Order League at his dinner table tonight. And here we see the same shot as before. This doesn't often happen. Anyway, he's not happy. He's thinking, this might be a good time for me to steal the bank's money and leave my wife and get the hell out of town. Meanwhile, Mrs. Mallory is being escorted to the stagecoach. And here comes the blonde. Her name is Dallas. And she's absolutely the sexiest woman in town. Some of the local men come out and watch as she climbs onto the stagecoach. And she shows her leg. And that was a little bit naughty in, 1880, around that time. And they go, wow, look at her. Oh, look at her. And she is annoyed at the attention, and she gives them a nasty kind of sarcastic look. And then a woman says, oh my goodness, Mrs. Mallory, you can't get on the stagecoach with that creature, meaning the blonde woman, Dallas. So from this, we get the sense that she's not a true lady. Now, audiences of the day knew exactly what this meant. The blonde is a prostitute, a whore, and that's why she's being chased out of town. The town represents order and morality. Dallas is not moral, so she's outcast. Haba. Next, the woman says to Mrs. Mallory, hey, you're not well enough to travel. This is the second time that a comment has been made to Mrs. Mallory about her health. We can see Buck saying,
You look a little peaked.
I'll be all right, thank you.
You look a little peaked means pale. And notice that Mrs. Mallory's got this shawl covering up her body. 1939 audiences would have figured it out by now. Mrs. Mallory is pregnant. So why don't we see that clearly? Well, back in 1939, the movie industry had a strict code about showing too much romance or, nudity or bad words. And another strict point was about don't say the word pregnant and don't show anyone who is pregnant. Now, I know today's movies don't follow such strict rules like they did back in the 1930s and 40s. And note, Mrs. Mallory, even though she's married and she's about to have a baby, she can't stop herself from checking out that cool gambler. I love the facial expressions here, the way he raises his eyebrows and the way she's sneaking a peek like a teenage girl. So the stagecoach has its passengers and it's ready to go, but oh my gosh, look, here comes some news from the soldiers, from the army, about the Indians. These army soldiers, also known as cavalry, are going to go with the stagecoach as far as the next stop. And this is really a necessary thing because, Indians might attack the stagecoach, and that's bad for business. So the marshal comes in and says, okay, did you hear that? If you think it's too dangerous, you better get out of here. And Dallas says, no. I'm not afraid of the Indians. There are worse things than Apaches, meaning these women are more terrible than the dangerous Indians. The director's really going out of his way to make these ladies look bad. Next, here comes the gambler, and he's not really a gentleman, but he behaves as a gentleman. He offers to go along and protect Mrs. Mallory from Indians if they attack. I mean, he's good with a gun, so you can use him on the stagecoach. Next, Doc says goodbye to the ladies with a rude gesture, which is pretty funny. Take a look at this. He puts his hand to his nose like that. And they react, oh, horrified. That's so disgusting. Now, you might remember in the Chaplin movie, City Lights, that Chaplin's character, the tramp, uses this same gesture in the monument scene at the beginning of City Lights. The thumbing your nose gesture is not as bad as the middle finger, but back in the 1880s and in the 1930s, when this movie was shown, it was still considered a little bit rude. Now, if you go back to Chaplin's use of this gesture, you can see the gag is a little bit longer and clearer. But in Stagecoach, it's edited so fast that you barely notice it. And there's a reason for that. And it goes back to censorship. In 1931, in Chaplin's City Lights, this gag wasn't censored because Hollywood studios had not agreed on a code of things that you can't say and can't do in movies. This code, known as the Production Code, went into effect in 1935. So all the movies made after 1935 were bound to the Production Code. This is made in 1939, and so we have to have it edited out. Okay, so the stagecoach rolls out of town. It stops to pick the banker up on the way out of town, and then the stagecoach runs with the cavalry behind it for protection. Next, there's this great shot opening the next scene that shows the stagecoach entering the vast desert. This is just a taste of what's to come later, the beautiful deserts of the American Old West. Now, in this movie, the desert is like Jurassic Park. You know, it's not a jungle, but it's pure nature, untouched by humans. Towns represent civilization, and the deserts in between the towns represent uncivilized land, untouched by nature, a place that humans don't belong, a place that humans cannot make civilized. Okay, so that's the end of the first sequence. In the first 15 minutes alone, director John Ford introduces 8 distinct characters to us, and he gives us 2 major plots of the movie, the Indian threat and the revenge saga. For the next few minutes, we have the 6 people inside the coach, and we're getting more information about Buck the driver, and then about Gatewood, who is being... Look at Mrs. Mallory's polite smile, but I don't like you. Now, this guy Gatewood said he got a telegram, but why doesn't he know that the Indians might attack? So at this point, we, the audience, know that this guy is a liar because the Indians cut the telegraph communications. And Doc makes jokes about it here. It's that old Apache butcher, Geronimo.
He's jumped the reservation. It's on the warpath.
He's jumped the reservation. He's on the warpath. These are 2 cliches that even today, if you say someone is off the reservation, it's an expression that means they're crazy. And if you say someone is on the warpath, it means that they're angry and they're maybe going to be violent. So here's the cavalry following the stagecoach, and the next important scene brings in the most important character of the movie. There you hear a shot from the Ringo Kid's Winchester. Now freeze for just a second. This is just one of the most iconic shots in American movie history. Director John Ford has prepared this awesome zoom shot for this great introduction of the Ringo Kid. The Ringo Kid represents the American cowboy. Look at this. Rugged blue jeans, a white cowboy hat, a saddle in one hand and a Winchester rifle in the other. As we zoom in, we see he's got this bandana around his neck flapping in the wind and a bead of sweat falling down his cheek. This is what a real man is all about. Once again, take a look. This is the shot that came to define for generations of American audiences.
Hey, look, it's Ringo.
What the tough American man looked like. The driver and the marshal, who Ringo calls Curly, both know the Ringo Kid. He's not a dangerous outlaw.
Hello, Curly. Hiya, Buck.
They like him, and he likes them. Curly, however, has to arrest him and take his rifle because he's broken out of jail. Now there are 7 people inside the stagecoach. And here we get more affirmation about how much they like Ringo. Now, inside the stagecoach, Ringo's polite to everybody, even the banker who calls him the notorious Ringo Kid. That's not very polite. And during this brief scene, we find out that Ringo's brother was murdered. That captures the attention and sympathy of everybody, even the hard woman, Dallas. Immediately following the shot of Ringo's bad memory comes our first clear view of the 3 glorious buttes of Monument Valley, director John Ford's first time shooting on location there. He would go on to film 6 more westerns over the next 25 years there, influencing directors into the present day to use it as a backdrop that symbolizes the American West. Monument Valley and these buttes have been seen in so many movies, most notably Back to the Future Part 3 and Forrest Gump. Outside the stagecoach, it is nature in the wild. Inside the stagecoach, it's a small world that has to remain civilized. Hatfield, the gambler, tells Doc to stop smoking because it's impolite to the lady, Mrs. Mallory. Hatfield says, "Doc is not a gentleman. You're not a gentleman. I took the bullet out of the back of someone that you shot." So because Hatfield shot someone in the back, that is not a gentlemanly thing to do. In fact, it's an act of extreme cowardice. And Ringo jumps in and keeps things peaceful between them. This scene here lasts exactly 1 minute of the film. So between this great first view of Monument Valley, we've got the little problems of these people taking just 1 minute of our time. But then it's followed by about 20 seconds of us seeing the stagecoach as it really is. A tiny set of people surrounded by huge, vast, uncivilized territory. Here, director John Ford is contrasting how small civilized society is in the tight, cramped stagecoach. It's contrasted with how large the uncivilized world outside of them is. The problems of this civilized society inside the stagecoach are really small and temporary compared to nature outside that's been there unchanged for millions of years. Okay, so the stagecoach is traveling from Tonto, Arizona on the way to Lordsburg, New Mexico. And it can't get there very quickly, so it travels in stages. That's why we call it a stagecoach. The first stage is Tonto to Dry Fork. And in Dry Fork, that's where passengers have to get out and get water. They get some food, stretch. The driver's got to water the horses, maybe change some. Now, this sequence lasts about 10 minutes, and it includes some nice wide shots and some great close-up shots, and some more information about several characters. The sequence here opens with the news that the U.S. soldiers aren't there. They got orders to go ahead to the next station. And this is a big surprise to Mrs. Mallory. This is why she, Mrs. Mallory's been worried about her husband's safety against the Indians. However, the bigger problem is that the stagecoach is going to have to travel to the next stage without any protection from the army. Now, that's pretty scary. So, everybody's going to have to go inside, and they're going to have to vote. Do they want to go back to Tonto? Or do they want to go ahead without the protection of the soldiers on the way to the next stop? They have to vote. Ladies first. Mrs. Mallory says, "I want to go on. I want to see my husband."
Determined to get to my husband.
And then?
What's your vote, mister?
Wait a minute. Hey, you're going to do ladies first, right? Ringo insists that Dallas is a lady and that her opinion should be heard. In all, the majority vote is to go on, despite the threat of Indians. All right, so what happens next reveals a lot about social class and prejudice in America at the time. Mrs. Mallory sits at the head of the table while Dallas walks away in the opposite direction. Ringo is completely unaware of the class structure going on here. And so he invites Dallas to sit next to Mrs. Mallory. And notice that everybody turns around and looks at him, at Ringo, like, huh? So Dallas sits down, and some icy cold stares are exchanged between Dallas, and Dallas kind of gives up here. But Hatfield runs over and fixes the problem by suggesting that Mrs. Mallory moves to the other end of the table, and the banker stands up and moves too. Now, Ringo is so innocent. He says, it's like I've got COVID or something. People are afraid of me. And she says, no, it's not you. And here he says, I can't even re-enter society. He clearly thinks that they're moving to avoid him. He has no idea that Pretty Dallas is a prostitute. And in this scene here, we can see a connection between the two of them developing. On the other end of the table, we get more information about the attraction between Mrs. Mallory and the bad guy gambler. She says, why have you been so kind? And he says, well, you're really a true lady. And she says, maybe I've seen you before. And he says, yeah, I was a soldier and your father was my officer during the war. And she finally recalls his name, Hatfield. And Hatfield says, well, that's what I'm called, yes. So Hatfield is hinting that it's not really his name, it's just what people call him. So here we're left with a little bit of a mystery. Back at the head of the table, Ringo and Dallas are having kind of the same talk. You look familiar, don't you? I've seen you before, right? Well, Dallas does not want innocent Ringo to know that she was a prostitute. So she changes the subject to, how famous you are, Ringo. And then Ringo says, yeah, well, I was a good cowboy. But, I don't know, things happen. And this is just so beautiful, because when Dallas agrees, yeah, things happen, we, the audience, understand really well that Dallas speaks from bitter experience. Once she was a good girl, but yeah, things happen. And then the sequence ends with Goofy Buck, the driver, announcing, okay, we're ready to go. And next we see that the stagecoach is on its own. As the cavalry goes a different road, Mrs. Mallory, always the lady, waves her handkerchief in thanks to the soldiers. Oh, here's my fake smile. And that brings us to the end of segment A of Stagecoach. We, the audience, have a lot more interest in the characters of Ringo, Dallas, Hatfield, and Mrs. Mallory by the end of segment A. Hatfield is a former soldier for the South in the Civil War. He appears to be a Southern gentleman, about equal in status and class as Mrs. Mallory, the soldier's wife. Dallas and the Ringo Kid, on the other hand, are absolutely social outcasts. He's an escaped prisoner from jail. He's an outlaw, and she's a prostitute. Outlaws and prostitutes always hold low-class positions in society and in movies. However, we like Ringo because he's kind and cool and innocent. And we feel sympathy for Dallas. We don't like the prejudice that we see Mrs. Mallory and Hatfield showing against Dallas. But we're not exactly sure if Mrs. Mallory and Hatfield, these high-class people, are completely bad or not. The people of the Stagecoach move in a world in which the vast desert and towering buttes around them make them appear insignificant, yet they are not unimportant to us. We want to see what happens next to the 9 members of the Stagecoach.